Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this RE018, where I take old stories and update them to modern standards. This particular story is called Manual Control, written by RegalLegalEagle. No, Frathus pounded on the console, but it didn't do any good. It wasn't coming back online. He took a heavy sigh and held his head in his hands as he heard the others move up behind him. Is it? Yes, the whole thing is fried. The Dominion mine worked perfectly. It blew the navigation array off completely. He waved a hand out the front window and could see the wreckage drifting free of the ship to join the rest of the debris field. And it probably sent off a signal, so it's just a matter of time before a patrol swoops in and kills us. The others in the command crew looked glum at the news. To make it this far, only to fall at the finish line, so to speak. When they'd found the precious intel, they knew the track back to friendly territory would be perilous, but they'd all volunteered. The debris field was supposed to be calculated risk. The Dominion wouldn't keep it well patrolled for fear of damaging their own ships, but they hadn't expected the mine. What do we do? Try a broad spectrum transmission? Gersmek answered. And let the Dominion know what we found, Frathus growled. What if we just try barreling through the rest of the field? Orcs thought aloud, but everyone's silence made it clear that wouldn't work. For some reason, Suresh was now looking out the window, probably observing the wreckage. I think there's a ship out there, she said, and Gershmek quickly ran to his console as he looked it over. You're mistaken. I don't have anything on sensors. No, I have signals or autopilot pings. He looked over as she pointed out the side window. But look, Frathus sighed and moved over to push her out the way. Clearly you're mistaken. He looked down through the debris cloud and was about to confirm that she was mistaken. But instead he squawked in surprise and pointed. There's something out there. It's moving around. It's getting closer. Now the rest of the crew rushed over, crowding around as they tried to peer out through the window. How? Gershmek exclaimed. We've got excellent sensors. Is it some new stealth ship that can disguise its navigation signals? Nuok snorted and flapped his throat pockets in derision. It's just a human ship. Those primitives couldn't possibly have anything like that. They only discovered FTL half a generation ago. True, but they're neutral. They might help us, Suresh exclaimed, always so full of hope. Oh, it's probably hit a mine as well, Frathus muttered. Why else can we not get a read on their sensors? Well then, how's it moving? Suresh asked, and everyone was quiet. They watched the ship get closer. Frathus figured it must be kilometers away based on how small it was. Then the proximity alarm when the ship turned on, and he jumped in surprise. It wasn't far away, it was tiny. How did humans make a ship that small without artificial gravity or biofarm pods? They watched it edge closer, tiny white puffs of something nudging the ship bit by bit towards them. Finally, it was above their ship, and they heard a clang as it stuck to their hull. What's going on? Why didn't it go to the docking arm? Orcs asked. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't have one? Gershmek shrugged. Doesn't have one? How do they get between the ships then? Orcs demanded. They waited and then all jumped as they heard something clang on the ship. It kept clanging until Suresh figured it out. It's outside the airlock, in some sort of suit. Nuok shoved her out of the way as he looked at the terminal. What sort of barbarian ventures into the void wearing only a pressure suit? Madness! Madness or not, it's trying to get in, Frathus said. Let it in. But the docking ring isn't engaged. How do we open it manually? Gershmek asked, and everyone looked confused. They'd never had to engage the controls on their own. Frathus sighed and stepped up to the terminal to make the airlock go through the various phases to let the small creature into the ship. After the airlock cycled, the crew crowded around the inside door, watching it open before the human stepped inside. The human was wearing a blue pressure suit that looked like something they'd see in a museum. No Brecken had used something like that in centuries at least. It was a full head shorter than even Serish, and it seemed frail and dainty by comparison to the rest of them. Are you here to help? Serish asked. I bet it's a trap, Orcs claimed, which was crazy. How do you navigate without a computer? Gershmek asked. The human stepped back, seemingly overwhelmed by talking before holding up a hand, indicating that they wait. Then it held up some kind of strange device. What's it doing? Orcs wondered. Then the human pressed a button on the device, and they heard a small, grainy voice speaking in terrible Brecken. "Welcome's greetings, I am Person Human. I love making maps." After that played, the human hit another button. "Do you need help?" "Oh, by the savior, it doesn't have a real communicator," Nuox squawked. Serish wasn't troubled, however. She leaned down and nodded. "Yes, please help." The human seemed to understand this and pressed another button on the device. "Manual controlling device." They all looked at each other for a moment then. The little thing couldn't be serious, could it? "Well, it did figure out how to move its own ship around the field," Gusmek said with some hesitance. "But that ship is tiny," Nuox complained. "Do we have any other choice?" Serish asked. Everyone was quiet for a moment before they looked to Fathers, who sighed and waved for the human to follow him. The small control section was just at the front of the ship, generally only used for testing the engines while in dock. He couldn't remember them ever being used while the ship was actually out in the open, let alone in a place as dangerous as the debris field. The human moved into a seat, pulling out some small silver-black thing from a pocket, and he began to write something on the small window the manual control seat had, as the others watched from behind. "Oh, what is he writing?" "I think it's religious iconography," Serish said, as the others couldn't make any sense out of the curved lines being drawn, or the straight ones in the middle. Those navigational trajectories?" Gashmek asked before the others simply laughed. Even Serish wasn't crazy enough to think humans could do that on the fly. Finally, though, the small creature stopped writing on the window and rubbed its hands together. Then it stretched its arms and shook everything out. It grabbed the control. When the ship started moving forward, everyone couldn't help but squawk and grab onto the consoles and strap themselves in. "This is madness! Oh, it's going to drive us straight into the debris!" Nuox cried. "I think those really were navigational trajectories," Gashmek said. "By the savior, I hope you're right." Frathis was gripping his chair as he watched debris fly closer towards him. But every time they looked ready to hit, the human would use the controls to send the ship on a new course. It was using the navigational thrusters constantly, spinning the ship this way and that, before angling and firing off in another path that somehow didn't have debris in it. If anything, the human was making better time through the field than their navigational computer had, just with far more terrifying speed than the computer would use. "How is it doing this? How is it doing this?" Gashmek was gasping out between terrified squawks, as 100 different times they were all surely about to die at the hands of this crazy human piloting their ship. But finally, they were out. No one could believe it. The human got out of the chair, nodding at the bracken, before pulling out the device from earlier and hitting a button. "Farewell, goodbyes. Time for making more maps." Then it waved at them and walked to the airlock, waiting patiently for Fathers to cycle the airlock and let the human back out. On the terminal, he watched it float out of the airlock and then climb up the hull before he couldn't see it anymore. A few minutes later, they heard a ka-chunk, and soon after, the tiny human ship boosting back into the debris field. They were standing around the control center, each humbled and confused. "Well, I didn't ask for payment," Nuox finally said. "It just asked if we wanted help," Serish said. They glanced around at one another. Fathers sighed. "If that wasn't the savior returned in disguise to lead us into deliverance, then we have to start hiring human pilots. Once we find one that isn't so heavy on the thrusters, that is." He walked to the communication terminal to send out a tight beam to the nav beacon they knew was waiting for him. Just as he turned it on, though, Gashmek spoke up. I just want to know what human maps look like, and if they're all for sale." End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Light Jock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.